Scene 8 is a bit of a weird one in the sense that in some ways Williams is really encouraging us to sympathise with Stanley here, but I think by structuring it and putting this scene so late on, actually I think Williams is sort of undermining that sympathy that might be coming out. I think had this scene been earlier, I think the audience would be very much encouraged to take Stanley's side here. But by placing it straight after the scene before, where Blanche is cast very much as this sort of innocent victim and Stanley is quite sort of malicious, I think actually all the American dream rhetoric that Stanley comes out with is seen to almost be part of the problem. So I think actually I'd see this as Williams undermining the American dream itself. To complicate this, there are reports that during one of the early performances of Streetcar, this scene got a standing ovation for Stanley because it embodied the view that a lot of the American audience sort of believed in, that anybody could make it in America. There's an added sort of layer of irony of that looking back, because I'd actually feel that this is much more a critique of that kind of viewpoint. I guess the fact that the audience applauded it shows contextually why it was so important for Williams to do that. We get at the start of the scene, about halfway down page 76, Blanche has a tight artificial smile on a drawn face. There's a fourth place at the table which is left vacant. In The Glass Menagerie, Williams' first play and first sort of big successful play, absence plays a big part in that. There's a big picture basically of the father of the family who's gone missing. He's left them basically, and throughout the play everything goes on underneath this portrait of him, just to emphasise this big male figure that's missing. The empty place here is used in a very similar way by Williams to sort of draw our attention. Again, it's this masculine figure who was abandoned, somebody who needs them. We get the argument being set up towards the bottom of page 76. Blanche asks for Stanley to lighten the mood by telling a joke. Stanley says, "I don't know when you're refined enough for your taste." So again, we're getting this sense of class system almost, of Stanley feeling judged, I guess, by the old money and the old education of the Dubois family. And then towards the bottom of page 77, Williams has Stella say, "Your face and your fingers are disgustingly greasy. Go and wash up and then help me clear the table." So we get this sense here of when Stella sort of joins in, that's when Stanley really flips. So we see Stanley actually at his most vulnerable here, being treated in the way that he's not treated by his other group of male friends. And I guess what William shows is when these World War II heroes come back, when their masculinity is undermined, that's when they become very sort of dangerous. So this scene could be a bit of a microcosm for what happens when servicemen return home and they're back in that domestic sphere. Stanley launched into this play, pig, Polak, disgusting, vulgar, greasy. There's an irony in the pig one actually, because Blanche makes a comment about it's like casting pearls before swine, her way of seeing the world. He's just completely lost. Stanley, because he doesn't know the expression, feels that Blanche is quite literally calling him a pig. And so pig is quite an interesting line here, I think, because actually it exposes Stanley's lack of understanding of Blanche's way of seeing the world. He feels it's all about class, and of course the point of the play is that it's not at all about that. We get the line, "I am the king around here." So it very much is the American dream. Every man is a king. That's the ideology that Stanley's spouting here, but I think it's done in a way that Williams wants to sort of undermine it deliberately. We get at the bottom of page 78, Stanley talking about the coloured lights, this harking back to the sex life that him and Stella had before Blanche came. So through the staging, Williams has very cleverly had Blanche intruding on Stella and Stanley. This is set on a stage that is a tiny apartment with just some curtains between them. So Williams has really sort of shown how this intimacy has been ruined in some ways by Blanche's presence. The coloured lights I think are important because that reminds us of the poker night scene, the bright primary colours. It reminds us of Blanche, the fact that her name itself means white, and it sets up this I guess the old versus new world, but also the romantic way of seeing the world of Blanche, the soft white lights, versus the harsh neon coloured lights of the new America represented by Stanley. And Blanche says, halfway down page 79, she talks about Stella's baby, and she says about candles and wind blows them out, and after that happens electric light bulbs go on and you see too plainly. So they're very much set up alongside each other, the electric light bulbs, the coloured lights of Stanley. It is about the old world versus the new, but it's not just about that, it's also about the literal way of seeing the world and the capitalist, consumerist idea of New America being literal and all about owning stuff, and Blanche's much more romantic view of the world. That carries on towards the bottom of page 79. Blanche talks about the hot baths, and she describes Stanley as a healthy Polak without a nerve in your body. Of course, you don't know what anxiety feels like. So again, it's the clash of two worlds. It's the old and the new world. Stanley as an immigrant from Poland, representing the future of America, but also again the strength of Stanley's physical body again versus Blanche's literal frailty, and the fact that it's imagination that allows her to be much stronger. Stanley makes the point, what I am is 100% American, born and raised in the greatest country on earth, and proud as hell of it. So, this is a racial slur by Blanche, and the audience is encouraged in some ways to sympathise with Stanley. But I think it's much more than that, and I think that the point that Williams is making is that Stanley never sort of gets that. He never gets that this is about more than just Blanche being stuck in the past. We get Stanley then switching halfway down page 80. He speaks slowly and with false amiability. He basically sets Blanche up here, talks about presents, and it ends up being this bus ticket back to Laurel. It reminds us of Blanche, saying that she's not a liar, she represents the world as it should be, not as it actually is. And there is that difference there between Blanche's, what Stanley sees as Blanche's lies, but that are actually much more about a romantic view of the world, versus Stanley's much more malicious use of lies and sort of setting Blanche up for a fall here. We get Blanche, we see this top of page 81. Blanche clutches her throat and then runs into the bathroom, coughing, gagging sounds are heard. Blanche's sort of physical frailty is emphasised yet again, but it's been Stanley who's brought her down. It's been that much more malicious, much more callous heart, I guess, of the New America that's done it to her. Stella makes the point, you needn't have been so cruel to someone alone as she is. Stanley replies with delicate peace. She is. Again, Williams is emphasising here Stanley's inability to see anything more than Blanche being a liar. It's much more than that, and Stella emphasises that by saying people like you abused her and forced her to change. This whole scene for me is about Stanley being unable to see Blanche's view of the world. That to him he is totally in the right because Blanche is a liar, but Williams, even if we're applauding Stanley and we're applauding the American dream, Williams is setting that up to be something that is quite cruel, and setting that up to be something that when we know the end of the play, we can't applaud anymore. We see as something quite destructive, that this new America is coming in and almost steamroller in everything that went before, and that's what Stanley and perhaps the audience, by applauding him, has failed to get until that point. Stanley again comes back to class towards the bottom of page 81. You thought I was common. You showed me the snapshot of the place with the columns. I pulled you down off them columns, and how you loved it having them coloured lights going. So for Stanley, his victory over Stella, I guess this sexual victory over Stella, is all about class. It's all about pulling her down to his level. Now again, pulling her down off the columns. She walks down the staircase. We get that image over and over again, that this to Stanley is his victory by pulling Stella down. It represents the future of America, that he can climb back up. Blanche is already looking up, talking about a rocket and firing into the sky. So I think, again, the point that Williams is making is that this is about much more than class. It's about much more than old versus new America. And I think that's why a lot of essays that root themselves a little bit too much on old versus new get a little bit lost, because this is much more, it's about imagination versus literal, I think, as well. It's about Williams using plastic theatre to force the audience to take a much more romantic view of life by the end of the play than they maybe did at the start. At the end of the scene, we really get Blanche's madness creeping in. The Varsuviana is heard. By now we know that is only in Blanche's head. Its music rising with sinister rapidity as a bathroom door opens slightly. Blanche comes out twisting a washcloth. She begins to whisper the words as the light fades slowly. So light, music, it's all representing Blanche's kind of inner view of the world, I guess, and her failing sanity, I guess. And she comes out singing these nonsense words about cornbread. So it really emphasises that Blanche has been kind of, I guess in some ways, destroyed by this point. And obviously what we get straight after this is Mitch attempting rape and Stanley actually raping Blanche, which really shows a sort of physical destruction. But obviously by doing that, I think it also sets the way for Blanche's metaphorical kind of ascension and rise up to a higher place, to the heaven that has been sort of foreshadowed throughout the play.